Hey, family. Here I am back at you again, Bishop John Seldis, and I'm happy to be bringing this conversation, what we call relevant conversations to you. I'm excited tonight to have one of my friends. I mean, sure enough, friends. We go so far back to when we both had hair that wasn't. It was black. And let me just say it right there. Right. We go that far back. I am just pleased to bring to you. I'm gonna do it like this. Darlington, South Carolina's most favorite son. I bet you're gonna get into a fight. You're gonna get into a fight right there, right? You're gonna start at your house. Talk about the favorite. And who has done his work, his theological education and undergraduate work right here in Connecticut. He went to a Connecticut school. Now I ain't gonna listen. It was a school down the street from me. And we ain't gonna talk about the rivalry between Trinity and Wesleyan. We ain't gonna talk about that enough. We're not talking about that tonight. But then he went on and did his master's work and his doctoral work down in Atlanta, the master's work, and then in Ohio, got a degree from United Theological, got a doctorate. He is a member of the famed Ebenezer Baptist Church. He is a professed member. But more importantly, that I better not go too far without saying Victory for the World Church claims him as the senior pastor. And the founder and organizer of that great church. He hails now from, I'm gonna say, the greater Hotlanta area. The church is in DeKalb, and I'm gonna bring my brother into the room. Would you help welcome the Reverend Dr. Kenneth L. Samuel to Relevant Conversations? What's happening, my brother? What's going on?
Good to be with you tonight, Bishop. It's a blessing to be with you.
We are buds. So no every now and then we might slip into a little familiarity. Y'all forgive us tonight. Us on tonight. But what I wanted to do tonight, I wanted to have Doc. I wanted to have you on tonight to talk a little bit about this landscape, this electoral landscape that we're in. Now, before we do that, let me just say this right here. We join in a tradition of preachers who also have their feet and fingers and their bodies and their thought processes in the political, right? We are in what I would call the company and the great cloud of witnesses. We join with people like Bishop Henry McNeil Turner,
Right.
who was a bishop in the AME church, but also was a politician.
Right.
Or we join in Henry Highland Garnett, who was also a member of Congress, as he served churches in both New York City and Washington, D.C. But I then we go right there to Atlanta. We got a preacher down there in Atlanta who ran for office, won, became governor, and then became an ambassador to the United Nations. Right?
Yes, that's right.
That's right. So there is this. It's not just Dr. Martin Luther King. Of course, we have to name him. In the midst of all of that preachers who cared about the political life of not just Black people, but all of God's people, right? So I needed to say that you have been the past president of your county's NAACP. You have been involved. You've run for political office in your own right. I remember giving $2 to your campaign. Anyway, but you understand the landscape that we are that this current election, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, Doc, is because you got a very important election that's getting ready to take place in just a few days. In fact, didn't you just say to me early voting started when?
Early voting in my area at least started today. I think in most counties it started today. And it'll go to the end of the week.
All right. Now, so let me just, for those of you all who just woke up and may have been visiting your relatives on planet Mars, that's where you were visiting, that there's an election, an important election that has in the balance, the balance of power in the Senate of these United States. Yes. And this election between Reverend Raphael Warnock and I can't call the other man's name. Herschel Walker. Let me the football player, Herschel Walker. And that in many ways, this election holds a whole lot for us as African Americans. There's a story within a story within a story that brings these two candidates to bear. And I think it is worth having a bit of conversation and drilling down a little bit about what's happening. But before we go, let's just talk about Stacey. Lord have mercy, Stacey Abrams. And I want to say something about that if you would. But would you kind of set the stage? You are a son of the South, so I can't make that claim. I'm a Midwest boy with proclivities for the last 20 odd years up here in the Northeast. So there's a kind of way we get aloof about the South. But you're a son of the South, born in South Carolina, and now you have lived and pastored in Atlanta and in Georgia. So could you talk a little bit about that? Let me shut up talking and give you the mic.
Sure. Bishop, you mentioned Stacey Abrams, and even though she did not win her second bid for governor of Georgia, Stacey has done so much to lay the foundation for electoral engagement in Georgia across the board. Her organization has really changed the landscape in registering new voters of all races, but particularly Black and Brown voters. And that is particularly crucial because, as we know, Black and Brown people often can provide the tipping point one way or the other. So, of course, every vote counts. But when you get a coalition of fair-minded white voters combined with engaged and conscientious Black voters, and you add to that young people, because the Atlanta area is full of colleges. Many young people go to school here. Many decide to stay after they graduate. So that youth vote, and I'm talking about the millennial vote and younger, that is crucial. And Stacey Abrams has done a tremendous job of reaching out to colleges throughout the metro Atlanta area, informing voters, registering them to vote. And then, of course, also she's done an amazing job of reaching out to the immigrants in Georgia and helping them to understand their citizenship rights and their responsibility to vote as well. So she's built an amazing coalition. And I think that even though she did not win, the fact that Biden took Georgia and the fact that we did elect John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, Pastor Warnock, 2 years ago, that was the direct result of Stacey's groundwork efforts, knocking on doors, educating people, getting people to vote. And by the way, she did it in a nonpartisan fashion because, as you know, if you're doing, registering to vote, that's nonpartisan. But she just opened the door, gave people the information that they needed, and empowered them to become responsible voters. And I think that, even though she didn't make it, when we look at, Biden, when we look at Reverend Warnock, when we look at John Ossoff, those are the direct results of her work.
Yeah, and see, one of the things that's important that I think we ought to lift up is the work of Black women, in particular, in electoral politics. Right? It is the history of our communities specifically. The folk who really did the grunt work. Right, the Ella Bakers, and others. I name her in particular because she was there with Dr. King and them, and while the fellas was trying to, it was some of the sisters that was actually getting the work did. That's the way my people would have talked. They would have said getting the work did.
No doubt.
And Stacey joins in that tradition of folk who really went to work, and we have to not only take our hats off, give her the honor and the respect due. Now, what's interesting in that, I say that to lift up as well in her race, as I think in some other races, the issue of women and Black women particularly, and other women of color running for political office. And what the electorate does is an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
It's quite interesting. It's interesting, being a Black pastor, pastoring a predominantly Black church. And I think in Dr. Gates' documentary on the Black church, I think he said it quite clearly. Two of the major segments of the Black church, namely, women and quote unquote queer people, without those two segments, there would be no church. And without those two segments, there would be no liberal progressive movement in America. Everything from women's rights to immigration rights. I mean, you name it. Women, Black women, and Black LGBTQ people have been at the forefront. But it's interesting that the church denigrates those two segments the most. The church's patriarchy is legendary, and certainly the church's heterosexism is emphasized quite often. But without those two groups, there would be no Black church, and without those two groups, there would be no progressive movement in America. And I think that to an extent, politics treats women and LGBTQ people in the same way that the church has. They take them for granted. But when, as you say, when it comes down to it, when you look at the people who are going to get out there, roll up their sleeves, work, and make it happen, you look to Black women, even though they have to face a lot of sexism and a lot of patriarchy coming from the church, and quite frankly, coming from secular politics. There's a lot of sexism still there. And of course, we know about the heterosexism. But it's a shame that that the two most dependable groups for progressive causes do not get the respect and do not, in many cases, reap the benefits of the hard work that they put in the political process.
Yeah, so that's just for sake of conversation.
Yeah.
Let's roll the time back a little bit. Wouldn't be no abolitionist movement for real,
Wouldn't be one.
if you didn't have Sojourner Truth and Harry
Harriet
Tubman
Tubman.
in the midst of that. All right,
Right.
wouldn't be no suffragette movement, right? Wouldn't be no anti.
Without Eleanor Roosevelt and those.
You wouldn't be no. I'm coming right down there. If it wasn't for Ida B. Wells, we wouldn't know about lynchings because it was Ida B. Wells's work, both her writing and her advocacy and her activism. These are, and of course, wouldn't be no civil rights movement. Fannie Lou Hamer, you needed Rosa Parks to sit on that bus and not get up and get hurt. Right. She wasn't the only. Claudette Colvin was also arrested in Birmingham on a bus. All right. So there are, and of course, let me just say, if it had not been for Coretta Scott King and for Mother Shabazz, Malcolm nor Martin would be remembered like they have been remembered. These are women, Black women in particular, who have led movements, who have led this movement in particular. So I wanted to put that, let's just name that up front. There is a huge debt that we still owe, and she hasn't quite got her due yet to Stacey Abrams and her entire team as it relates to what happened in Georgia and the elections that have happened in most recent past.
Because Black women continue to be the most dependable voting bloc for progressive causes in America. The most dependable.
You want to say that one more time?
They don't just talk the talk. They show up, they vote in mass, and they make a difference.
I'm going to just tell you, in my house, I learned what you do because I was there up under my grandmother and my aunt who worked the polls.
That's right.
And my mother. And I have to say, hey, Pamela, to my beloved who partners with me in life and in the work, her mother was a champion for poll working and in her neighborhood. She was one that made sure that we learned how to vote. And everybody on the block got a voter registration card, and you went down there and go to vote. I mean, that's just part of what we do, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting to me. So let's turn our attention a bit to this election that's coming up. It was a hard fought election 2 years ago for Reverend Warnock, and down to both. You mentioned Brother Ossoff and Pastor Warnock to this strange runoff system y'all got down there in Georgia. I ain't gonna hate, but it's a little,
it's real strange.
You don't get 50%.
You got to get 50 plus 1%, and so it's not majority vote win. You got to hit that 51%, or it automatically goes into a runoff.
All right, so that's what we got going on here now, and what the importance of this election is a couple of fold. Now that we know that already the Senate will remain on the side of the Democratic Party.
Right.
This election now would place the Senate in a position to not have to so rely on several folk.
In
particular,
Kristen Sinema.
That's right.
And Joe Manchin.
That's right. So I was going to say the senator from Arizona, right, and the senator from West Virginia,
right,
who all of a sudden, I bet you we couldn't have called their names 4 years ago. Most of us didn't know Kristen Sinema, all right, or Joe Manchin.
That's right.
But now we know them, and they understood the power that they held and the presence. They were able to now begin to cut deals and lead conversations in ways that this is this time, this political moment, and so what we have now, that's in the balance, if this seat does not go to the incumbent and is, you all choose to elect the other guy, Herschel Walker, then we got them back in play again for an additional 2-year period of time. So the importance of this election in particular carries the weight, a weight that 2 years ago we didn't know we even had, right? We didn't even know we had this. Right.
And because the system is structured the way it is, you have Sinema and Manchin who do not represent as many people as, say, a John Ossoff, for that matter. I mean, because their states are just not as populated. But many people suffer, whether it be gun legislation, whether it be, lack of affordable, health care, etc. Many more people suffer because of the balance in politics that gives them the leverage in the Senate to basically hold all kind of things hostages, even though democratically they are not representing as many people as, say, for instance, someone from a more populous state. It's just a fact. So it's not fair, but it's the way the political process is designed. And that's why this election in Georgia is so critical, because we do need that one vote leverage. We of course we control it now through the vote of Vice President Kamala Harris. But let's just say that those, what we call in the South, those blue dog Democrats, which is another way of saying, Dixiecrats, they can hold up the works just based on how, the balance of power, even though technically, and I keep going back to this, they don't represent as many people, as many voters as others. But that's the way the balance of power is. Each state, no matter how populous, only gets 2 senators. So that's the way it is.
Yeah, our system is. I often say our system is a representative democratic republic.
Right.
Right.
It's not a true democracy. You're right.
It is not. It ain't one voice, one vote.
No.
It's one vote. That then that gets a representative who then has voice and vote, right? And the way we set this up, I set it up. My ancestors were like your ancestors. We was chopping cotton, picking cotton, carrying on. But in this country, this so-called country, that we put this democratic experiment together, where there are 2 branches of what we call the legislative branch. There are 2 halves to the legislative branch, along with the judicial branch and an executive branch. And then they are to co-lead with the executive branch having veto power, right? And in the way in which in some of our churches, the pastor of long tenure and standing might not be able to vote it all in, but we do have these days, and you and I have this particular seat, if you will, as being the organizing pastor. Now I may not be able to make it all happen at Amistad Church, but for sure they're gonna have to talk to me, and we're gonna have to agree. Together, congregation and
there you go.
Founding organizing pastor. And so I understand that kind of executive authority, which in fact waned a bit during most recent years. And I think and it has put pressure on our society in writ large to understand how, in fact, and for good or for bad, here's where we are. We are now having to have conversations with our with family members and our friends, and certainly within the community, to say, okay, I know, because you hear it like I hear.
Yeah.
You know, Reverend, they say, Bishop, why should I vote? It don't matter anyway, right? And I gotta have that conversation, and I'm happy to have that conversation. Every time I hear that, I'm happy to. I know some of the millennials and some of the young people be like, oh Lord, why'd you ask that question? Lord, Bishop them got turned up. But I love having to answer to respond to the fact, why should I vote? Why does the vote matter? Could you talk about that a bit, especially in the South?
You know, and I always say to people, you know, democracy only works the way it should when people are engaged and informed. You know, that question that someone asked, you know, Benjamin Franklin, you know, when he was, you know, at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and they said, you know, what kind of government did you give us? And he said, a democracy if you can keep it. That's the key. Can you keep it? And as we talked, okay, it's not a true democracy, it's a representative republic democracy. But, you know, with all that said, the reason why we have to cherish our vote and make every effort to exercise it whenever we can is because, you know, if your vote didn't count, then people wouldn't be going through such extraordinary measures to take it from you. If it didn't matter, there would not be such an effort in the country to suppress the vote. And that's what we're dealing with here in Georgia. You know, we were under mandate that no changes to the election laws could be made without federal supervision and an agreement to make sure everything was right. Because, of course, I'm from a state with a history of voting infractions, voter denial, voter suppression, voter intimidation. I mean, people have literally lost their lives over fighting over the right to vote. And even today, when we see, you know, the attack against early voting, mail-in voting, when white people were doing it, there was no problem. More and more Black people start doing it, all of a sudden it's a problem. And by the way, in Georgia, no evidence to this date, Bishop, as I speak, has been found to say that mail-in voting, early voting has been corrupted, distorted in any way. And they have checked, double-checked, triple-checked. They can't come up with any evidence. So the only rationale or reason to try to change it and try to lessen early voting days, cut out weekend voting. They didn't like the fact that we would have church and then tell our members, all right, I'll be pronouncing the benediction at the polling place. So y'all meet me on down, and that's what we would do. And we would dismiss, and the folk would go vote. We meet in the parking lot, have prayer, and say, now you're dismissed. And he said he didn't like that because that was happening too much. And it was too much of an influx of Black people exercising our right to vote. So this is what and in terms of our current election, let's talk about election denial. Let's talk about trying to overturn a legitimate election of whatever your politics are. I mean, we should all agree that, you know, you should not interfere with a legitimate electoral process. And you should not be calling, you know, elected officials and voting officials, asking them for a certain number of votes. I mean, we had all of that. I mean, 45 is under investigation now. You know, even though we know when the leadership changes hands in the House, you know, that might be squashed. But I think America has seen enough for people paying attention from the January 6th committee to know that there was a deliberate effort. And here's the thing, Bishop, it almost succeeded. It almost succeeded. It almost worked. And only a few other key people would have had to agree with what 45 was trying to do. And all, his thing is, well, if you don't have the evidence, just muck up the system. Just delay, stall. You're casting doubt. You're casting dispersion. You're causing people to feel uncertain. Well, what is going on? And that's what he wanted to do. It's what he almost did had it not been for a few people. Hats off to a few Republicans in the state of Georgia who said, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going along with it because number one, it's not true. Number two, it's not right. So that's what this is. And by the way, Trump has never apologized for trying to overthrow our election, attacking our Capitol. And Herschel Walker is a hand-picked protege, if you will, a hand-picked apprentice of Donald Trump. So, we've had a number of election deniers run for office throughout the nation. Some of them have actually won office. Now, what people need to think about is just say we have another issue where people have voted, the people's voice has been registered. Let's just say we have another scenario where somebody tries to overthrow a legitimate election. They make significant calls, and this time, instead of people standing on principle, they are more caught up in partisan politics, and they give the nod and they muck up the system, and then all of a sudden we are back to square one because our vote is our voice. And as Malcolm X so eloquently said, in America, it is the ballot or the bullet.
Didn't Malcolm say it?
People who don't want to vote, give me the ballot, because if people feel pressured, denied, devalued long enough, that's a powder keg that's going to explode at some point. And I think Malcolm, tried to tell us, listen, let try to work the ballot, because if not, the consequences are devastating for all of us.
Well, and this, you want to talk about our history. Our history says that when there has been a denial of people's voices, Dr. King said it best. He said riots are really the voices of the unheard.
Of the unheard. That's right.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
So now what's interesting to me, we don't call people. Ask me. They'd say, "Well, Bishop, did you need to just go out there in the street and protest?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'm joining in the tradition that we've done in this country from even before the founding of this country."
That's right.
I mean, the Boston Tea Party wasn't about no tea and party. That was a turn up. That's what the kids say.
It was a turn up.
It was a turn up. That's what it was, right? They was dressed in Native American. They were trying to, throw people off. It was a turn up. And so this country has this history of registering our will, right? And saying, using our voice and our power, our ability to act in certain ways. And our brother, Bishop Barber, William Barber, talks about what he calls this third Reconstruction. Some would say the Revolutionary War was the first Reconstruction of us, of peoples in a society trying to figure out how do we be better, how do we do better. Now, of course, we left a couple of things undone. Slavery was something undone that needed to get dealt with. So then we had to have the second Reconstruction. Right? Yeah. We had to build again, think about this again. So the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment get enacted. We had to get rid of slavery. We had to deal with the fact that everybody has some equal presence.
That's right.
Under the law. We everybody got to be taken into consideration, which was the very opposite of what the Supreme Court ruled on a few years earlier when they came out with the Dred Scott decision. Roger Taney, who was the Chief Justice, said that white people don't never have to be respectful when it comes to black people and the law. Well, the amendment, the 14th, 15th, and even the 16th Amendment, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment stood in direct opposition to that, right? Okay. So, and then of course later in 1870 we get the right to vote for black men, because women, again, no women were allowed to vote until 1920. So this thing we call democracy has been an experiment, and it has had to evolve, and we come from the tradition. As faith leaders that said, this is how I say it, bro. There's some things that are just right. And there are some things that are just wrong. And we don't have to listen. They're dot and tittle. We can have conversation, debate, discuss, and then vote, and whoever wins wins, right? But we ought to not be talking about some stuff. Some stuff ought to just be right. Now, how we do it, and what methodology we use, okay, that's up for debate. But there's some stuff ought not be in the discussion around what's right and what's wrong. In fact, your mama and them said it best. Baby, you know what's right. Or can I quote the Bible and y'all won't get mad at me? There's a passage of scripture that says, you have no need of a teacher, for the Spirit has already come to teach. Right. You don't have a need of a pastor or a bishop or an apostle. What you need is go get dipped in the water and come on and after you have received, believe. So okay, I'm preaching. I done went to preaching now. I'm sorry for our non-religious folk. But that's I believe what we bring to these conversations, and to this particular conversation. It is a moral issue that I think that is at issue here. If we're talking about how does in fact what Reverend Barber, our brother and friend, says about it, it is these states in the South. Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi. Those states, the Black Belt. Can I say it? Can I say it like I feel it? The Black Belt where there's a great populations of Black folk. If we figure out how to get it right, we figure out how to reach our people, you've said it best. We are the majority, and I believe there's an issue afoot, because if all of us went down there and registered to vote, I believe the balance of power shifts, and you then have to deal with a different. You got to deal differently when now you are the minority, not the majority.
That's right. And you can, there is a. I don't even know if it's clandestine. I think it's to me, it seems like it's rather apparent at this point. I won't even call it clandestine, but there is, to me, part of it is being able to connect the dots. The fact that you have this ongoing crisis with young Black males that are in many instances, kind of, there's that pipeline from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse. And, I think many educators and experts are saying now that, we're losing many of our Black boys at about 6th and 7th grade. They're doing a study now in Georgia about how gangs are now targeting 11, 12, 13-year-old boys in particular to be caught up in gang activity and all that it involves, drugs, if it's sex trafficking, if it's firearms. I mean, you got these adolescents now being recruited and actively engaged. We just had another shooting in Atlanta recently. 11, 12, about three kids, 11, 12, 13 shot, gang related. And, they're saying now we got to, address, this recruitment, of gangs, because, I mean, that's a trigger. You get involved with a gang, you start being violent. Well, I mean, you're not educated. The only certain jobs you're not going to be eligible for them. So at a certain point, then you get a prison record. You're not going to be eligible to vote, even though they say after you serve your sentence, you still have to, have your record expunged. But it's a lot of red tape. A lot of people are not informed. And quite frankly, most Black men who have served prison time are not really thinking politics. They're thinking survival. And so, it's easy for the system to pick them off. They're not even in the game because, their criminal activity, their police record, they can't rent an apartment. They're not going to get certain jobs. They're not going to be, reinstated their voting rights unless they are savvy and pay attention and know how to have those records expunged. So, it's all a part, and I'm not I'm not one to put everything on racism, but I am saying that the lack of attention that we give to young black men in this school to prison pipeline, coupled with this mindset that they feed black men in particular, it's all about your survival. So, you're not thinking politics. No wonder many black men are not voting, and those that are, some of them vote Republican because they say they're interested in bread and butter issues, day-to-day survival issues, as we all are. We all have to survive, but well, part of our job is to help people to understand that you got to think about the consequences of things. And as I tell people all the time, there once was a time when every black person had a job. It was called slavery. So if you're just talking about our economic, quote unquote, well-being, we all had a job at one time. We all, and we all had some food to eat, may not have been the best. But look at the conditions that we were in. We were on plantations. And so I'm telling people, I'm trying to help people to understand that as they try to reconstruct the plantation, if all you're interested in is your next meal, or how you're going to pay for your ride, or how you're going to trick out your house, if that's all you're concerned about, then of course you are not going to be able to register the kind of vote that will be beneficial for your people, because you have narrowed everything down to your own immediate survival needs. And you're not thinking long range. You're not thinking broadly speaking, because you can have a nice life and still live on a plantation and be treated like a nigger. And what people are willing to trade for their, what I call this material immediate gratification, is not worth it. We're suffering because of that.
Mm-hmm. Listen, we had issue here in Connecticut around putting former convicted felons back on the voting rolls and expunging their records. We now have passed a state law that does that. You're absolutely correct. There's all kind of red tape, and there's all kind of processes that go into that. And most states now have some version of that. Now, there's still some states that haven't come into the 21st century.
Right.
But here it is at its core. If you're gonna have opinions, and this is where I hang my hat. If you're gonna have an opinion about who's the president, if you're gonna have an opinion about who's governor, if you're gonna show up at the barbershop talking, my question is, are you registered?
Are you registered? That's right.
And then do you go to vote? Because if you're not registered and you don't vote, then your opinion don't matter. You can keep on talking. I don't have to listen. All right. Because so I'm right there. And quite frankly, I think it is our job. We had a couple of brothers who were engaged, and I had the opportunity a few election cycles back to be invited to several conversations. You know where we had those conversations at? At the barbershop and at the beauty shop. And so a few of us would go, and we had these across the state, and we did a barbershop, beauty shop tour. and it was one of the most enjoyable opportunities I've ever had, to be on the ground in the neighborhood talking, and you hear, just like if you've ever been in a black barbershop. I can't speak for white folk barbershop, but I can show speak for black folk barbershop and beauty shop. They talk more junk. They done made movies about how much junk they get talked, and yet it was one of the most revealing opportunities I've had to really meet people and hear people, where they're at, without all the veneer, and people, some people would know who I am or know who some of the other folk were, and we really had some great conversation. And it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't preaching to the choir, because folk had opinions and had some different ideas and thoughts. But here was an opportunity for us to be heard and to hear, and then to be and do what the Holy Book says. Iron sharpens iron, right? Right. To be informed, and to be engaged in a way that afterwards I had the opportunity to run into several of those folk after that particular season, and they said, you know what, Bishop, that was one of the most important. It wasn't it wasn't no lot of fanfare, and it was 20, 30 of us at any given point at one time or another. But that was one of the most significant opportunities to hear and to think and to reflect and to lead a barbershop with more than a haircut.
Right. And those are the kind of conversations, Bishop, that need to come to the church as well.
Yeah.
And if church people became less concerned about what people wear and more concerned about what people are thinking and what they are believing, we could have honest, what we call really come to Jesus meeting conversations. And not be so caught up, if, people use a little slang or use a little, profanity, that ain't going to, listen, sometimes people use those words to give emphasis to what they're saying. Let's get the message, and let's look over that, and let's provide the kind of spaces. I'm telling our youth ministry now. We yes, we're gonna talk about the Bible, and we're gonna talk about the biblical stories, but I want them to relate it to their everyday lives. And if you're gonna talk about Jesus on the cross, fine. Let's look at his level of patience and how did he manage to not lose it mentally, spiritually. What are we? Are we even trying to approximate Jesus in terms of managing our anger? Because God knows we got a lot to be angry about. But shooting, killing, going to prison only makes matters worse. So we got to find ways to address these issues. And I talked to a lot of young Black men. They're angry, I think legitimately so. They feel unheard. They feel, in many cases, they feel that, women have a leg up on them. And maybe in some cases, they do, because, many teachers don't know how to handle Black boys. And we have so few Black men in the classroom. People are afraid of them. They don't want to talk to them. They don't know how to step to another Black man the way you or I would, Bishop. See, because number one, we understand why they're angry. We understand why they're upset. Now, they may be handling it wrong. They may be expressing it wrong. But we know the dilemma. We know the desperation. We know the hurt that Black men mask behind, this masculinity. We know, how fragile the Black male ego is. So people don't want to be dissed in any way. They don't want to be disrespected. So we understand that. So we can have that dialogue, and we can go toe to toe. But when you don't understand that, you just put those guys in a category. All of a sudden, they're unteachable, they're unreachable, and of course, they get caught up, in the prison system, and where they're not doing themselves or anybody else any good.
Langston Hughes said we wear the mask.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sorry, that's not Langston Hughes. That was Paul Lawrence Dunbar. Well, I better not do it. Dunbar. We wear the mask. We owe a great debt to the women, and in particular our mothers and our aunties, our grandmothers, who loved us and cared for us, that brought us along, that raised us up and grew us up, right? And yet here we are in this, 21st century reality. We will be, when I say we, let me speak of it in the royal we, in this country, in just a few years, maybe in our lifetimes, Doc, that persons of color will be the majority in this nation. We're not too many days from that.
Right.
And so what is it that we want to see? I hear I hear the sisters and the brothers, these young people, I'm gonna just get mine, and they got a way they express that.
It's
Okay,
that survival thinking.
that's right. Okay,
Yeah.
and yet I think I'm in the book, in several of our books, our sacred wisdom books that say, you're really wise when you're preparing not just for you or your children, but for your children's children's children. All right. That then when you've done that, then you can maybe sit back and lay in the cut with yours. But until then, then there's gotta be a somewhere that we connect together, that life has to be bigger than just what's happening with you, right?
It's got to be bigger.
It's got to be bigger.
And you got to grasp that.
Yeah. And what my experience has been in talking with folk, there is a reality. They know that intrinsically. Folk know that I'm not an island unto myself, right? And so what we are actually talking about, this participating in the democratic process we have here in the United States, it is one version or one form of actually doing community-based work, right? Is participating in the life of the community. What is it that you would like to see in the world? Then I here's my guy. Here's my guy. Howard Thurman says, don't ask what the world needs. All right. But do this, catch on fire and go do that. Because what we need is folk that's caught on fire, in his words. I'm paraphrasing. There is a need for us to be more and do more and be better and do better. I believe that's something that's spiritually beckoning us, pulling us forward, pulling us to the side, stretching us, maybe sometimes even asking us to stand back, step back, go back, shrink back for a bit so that you can be prepared for the movement that is to come, that's forward, that's right facing. And this is an opportunity when we vote, sisters and brothers, folk out there who are watching us live and who will see us virtually later. What we're having a conversation about is really what our spirits are longing for, and that we do that in a communal fashion. We do that in common together, and let's be in discourse and dialogue about it. Let's if you like it, I like a good argument. I love me a good one. You got your points, I got my point. Let's go, right? But at the end of the day, we got to come out of that thinking, moving, doing, and really creating the world, the community, the society, the space and place where we live. We're creating it together. And listen, if you're not putting something on it, you're part of the problem.
And that's why voting is important. That's why we have to look beyond just bread and butter issues, because community is the key to our progress, our development. Community is the key to our freedom. There would have been no Underground Railroad without a community effort of conscientious people of all races, by the way, both genders. So, somebody says, when God has given you a vision to do something, because whatever God calls you to do is going to require more than you to do it. So in order to get it done, you're going to have to build relationship with other people. And I think that's God's way of keeping us connected. So, when I see, when I see, I'm trying to talk to, these kids and, they're wizards, on these things right here, our third arm, if you will, and I have to ask them, just put that down for a minute, because I want to talk directly to you and I want to look into your eyes. I want you to look into mine so we can have a real conversation. Now, I'm not going to deny the values of technology. We all know how it has helped us, but it has also hurt us in the sense that it has allowed us to become more insulated and more disconnected from each other. So we're connected to the World Wide Web, but we're disconnected with the person sitting right in front of us that we need to be conversing with. And so I think we have to have some workshops on effective communication. It's one thing to be a computer whiz, but you got to have some people skills, because as we've been saying, it's not just about the individual, it's all about the community. And I tell people all the time, God is communal in nature. That's why there are three persons. Because they all commune with each other. God is communal by nature, and God has created us to be in community, because we cannot survive without being in community. That is the key to our life. But if we think it's just about me and what I want, and I don't give a damn about you, and what you do is you, and that's your business, this is my business, that is not going. It has never worked. Never worked. It's all about community. There's no communion with God without community with each other. So we have to look at building community, and that's what elections are all about. Elections are all about making a community statement. Certainly, we're voting, on our own, individual needs, but I'm not just voting for myself. I'm voting for students trying to pay back their student loans, because I don't want them saddled with the debt I was saddled with when I graduated. So I was already behind the 8 ball, having to pay back these thousands of dollars worth of loans before I could even start making money for myself. I don't want to put that on another young person. So I'm fighting for them. I'm long out of school, but I'm fighting for them. I'm fighting for, seniors, who can't afford their medicine. It's got to be about somebody other than yourself. And back to this election. That's why it's so important for everybody to vote, because you're voting for yourself, yes, but you're also voting for your loved ones. You're voting for your community. You're voting for your people.
So we just heard somebody who's there in Georgia right now. He in Georgia right now, who is saying this election is about more than just you, but it is about us all, right? There is this communal aspect to elections. It is this voice that gets raised. It is the mandate that takes us forward. And in fact, the social contract is you win some, you lose some, right? They say,
but you never stop fighting.
That's exactly right. And they say,
stop fighting.
That's right. They say in baseball, there's always next year. That's what the Red Sox used to say for years and years and years. It's always next year. It's always next year. Well, they finally won a couple of World Series here in the last 20 years. I happen to be in New England. I'm a baseball Cardinal fan. And so, and there was 2 of them World Series the Red Sox win, and they beat them. They beat my Cardinals, both of them. One, they swept them both straight, and the other one, it was lousy too. So I feel some type of way about that. But the metaphor is actually what is true for me. That there's always another election, right? There's always the election that is facing us. We go from this place. We got to start thinking about 2024, right? Okay. We got to start thinking about what are the ways in which we can do our part, right? And so for me, here's what our friends who will see this, who are in the Georgia, I invite you to participate in the process that's yours, right? It is yours to do that. And then what I think what we ought to do is once everything, all the dust settles, we go to work for what will be an interesting and meaningful and in many ways, that we say this all the time about every election, right? But these elections here seem to have the kind of weight that maybe you don't see these kind of weighted elections. I mean, we've had 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 contested presidential elections in the last 20-25 years. I mean, very folk, hanging chads. That was 22 years ago, right? In the South, it ain't got past me. These were all Southern.
That's right.
So any parting word, Doc, that you would have to folk? You done preached a good sermon. That last little bit was real good right there.
Well, listen, Bishop, I'm just delighted that we can connect spirits and energy, because this is what it takes. And if we're talking about community, let's not forget those who shed their blood and literally died for the right to vote without ever getting the right to vote themselves. Let's remember, those who marched. Let's remember, those who were injured. Let's remember those who, in the words of, John Lewis, got into good trouble for good reason, fighting for the right to vote. And John Lewis would say it so often, the vote is not just political. For Black folk, it is sacred, because we have, Dr. Lowry said, we have marched too long, we have bled too profusely, and we have died too young not to vote. A lot's riding on every election, and this one is no different. The control of the Senate, with the House already being under the control of the conservatives, is going to give tremendous opportunity and leverage to get progressive causes through and passed. Whether it be sensible gun legislation, whether it be cleaning up the mess that we have on our borders, whether it be doing what we can to strengthen public education. And by the way, teach history, not theory, but teach history. And you're not going to teach American history without Black history, because Black history is American history. You're not going to get around that. So, I mean, there's so many things that we have to fight for, that we have to be cognizant of, but it requires the community. It requires us looking beyond our own immediate self-interest and centering our focus on community, because like it or not, we rise and we fall together.
Yes.
And I think Dr. King, said it many years ago, we are each inextricably bound together in one single garment of humanity and mutuality. So what affects one of us indirectly affects all of us. What affects one of us directly affects all of us indirectly. And a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The sooner we learn that, then the sooner we can, galvanize, do what we need to do. And my prayer is that everybody in Georgia who can vote, who is eligible to vote, will come out to the polls. Even if you did not vote in the last election, you're still eligible to vote in this runoff. And I hope, and I speak from my heart to my Black brothers, who I love dearly. And when you hear me, analyzing our crises and our trauma, it's not out of a lack of love, because I love who God made me. Mm-hmm. And so I have to love, my Black brothers, but I know that we have a lot of work to do. And I know that we have to talk to each other and get beyond our, rivalries and tribalisms and our, in many cases, self-centeredness, and understand that this is a fight that will impact all of us. So it engages all of us, all hands and hearts on deck at this point, Bishop. So that's what I'm pressing for. I was gratified today when I went to a vote to see that there was a line out the door at the library that I early vote at, and I'm so happy to see that people, coming out, taking this runoff seriously, and I hope that continues throughout the week. But we do what it takes, and I'm hopeful that this election in Georgia can not only bless Georgia, but bless the nation.
All right. Well, you've just heard it from right there in Hot Atlanta, as we call it, in the neighborhood where I was from. We call it Hot Atlanta. Thank you again, brother Samuel. I appreciate you being willing to spend a little time with us to talk about what are important, significant, and relevant to come, let us reason together.
Yeah.
The book says, saith the Lord, that we can have some time to take out and pause, talk about things that are in fact life and death for some of us. That's right? For some of us, and this election in particular. I appreciate you coming to speak as a son of the South with the voice of the Southern preacher. Amen. I thank you, brother, for being willing to share with us. Listen, everybody, we're gonna chop it up here next time. I promise you, I made a vow to you and to the Lord that we would spend our time doing things that I think would be meaningful, that would be that actually help us to change the world. That's what I want to do. And we're praying for you and your congregation, your family.
Thank you, Bishop. Our prayers are with you as well.
And thank you. We need them. All right. We'll see you all. Peace in the Middle East. And you all know how I say it. Peace in the Middle East and hair grease. All right. Good night.
God bless.